Hey guys, today our guest will be Marcus. He comes to us with a story that is chilling. If you like it, leave a comment and subscribe so you don't miss any more stories. And so without further ado, let's get started. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I work the graveyard shift at a 24-hour gas station on Route 9, about 40 miles outside of Cedar Falls. What I'm about to tell you started 3 weeks ago, and I don't know how much longer I can take it. I've been documenting everything, writing it all down, because I need someone to know what happened here. If something happens to me tonight, at least there will be a record. The Sunrise Express sits alone on a desolate stretch of highway where you might see 5 cars between midnight and dawn. It's one of those old-school gas stations with 2 pumps, a small convenience store, and a repair bay that hasn't been used in years. The building itself is a relic from the 1980s, beige brick walls, fluorescent lighting that hums constantly, and linoleum floors that have seen better decades. Behind the store is nothing but pine forest for miles, and in front is just the empty highway stretching into darkness in both directions. I've been working nights here for 2 years, ever since I dropped out of community college and needed to pay rent on my studio apartment. The pay is terrible, but it's quiet work. Most nights it's just me, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the occasional ping from the security system, and the distant sound of trucks on the interstate about 5 miles east. I stock shelves, clean the coffee machines, help the occasional trucker who stops for cigarettes and energy drinks, and try not to fall asleep during the dead hours between 2 and 5 a.m. Until recently, it was the most boring job in the world. I actually liked the solitude. After growing up in a chaotic household and dealing with the noise and stress of college, there was something peaceful about being alone with my thoughts, listening to podcasts or music while I worked. The only real excitement was when the coffee machine would break down, or when someone would try to pay for gas with a clearly fake credit card. That all changed on October 15th, a Tuesday night that started like any other. I clocked in at 11 p.m., relieving Janet, the evening shift supervisor. She's worked here for 15 years and knows every regular customer by name. As she gathered her purse and jacket, she mentioned that the security cameras had been acting up lately. Probably just the age, she said, adjusting her thick glasses. These cameras were installed when Reagan was president, I swear. Corporate keeps saying they'll upgrade the system, but you know how that goes. I nodded and settled in behind the counter, pulling out my phone to start a new audiobook. The first few hours passed normally. A few cars stopped for gas. I sold some cigarettes to a trucker headed to Denver, and I restocked the energy drink cooler, the usual routine. I was in the back room around 2 a.m., checking inventory on paper towels and motor oil, when I heard the front door chime. I walked back to the counter, but the store was empty. The sensor sometimes triggered when large trucks passed by on the highway, creating vibrations that fooled the system. I shrugged it off and went back to my inventory. At 3 a.m., I started my routine cleaning of the coffee station. I was wiping down the counter when I noticed the security monitor flickering. We had 6 cameras total, 4 covering the parking lot from different angles, 1 focused on the front door, and 1 watching the register area. All 6 feeds showed the same thing: empty parking lot, dark highway, nothing unusual. The timestamp in the corner read 3:32:45, but at exactly 3:33, every screen went black for about 10 seconds. Complete darkness, like someone had turned off all the cameras simultaneously. When the feeds came back online, there was a figure standing at pump number 4. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I was seeing things. Working nights can mess with your perception, especially during those dead hours when your circadian rhythm is fighting against your work schedule. But the figure was definitely there on the monitor, tall, motionless, standing right next to the regular unleaded pump. I looked out the window. The parking lot was completely empty. I looked back at the monitors, still empty. The figure was gone. I rubbed my eyes and checked the timestamp. Less than a minute had passed, but I could swear I'd been staring at that screen for several minutes. I told myself it was just fatigue, maybe a glitch in the old camera system, but something about it felt wrong. The figure had been perfectly still, unnaturally so, like a statue someone had placed in the parking lot. I made a note in the logbook: 3:33 a.m., security cameras experienced brief outage, possible electrical issue. Then I tried to put it out of my mind and focus on restocking the candy aisle. The rest of the shift passed without incident. When Janet arrived at 7 a.m. to relieve me, I almost mentioned the camera glitch, but decided against it. It seemed too minor to worry about, And besides, I was probably just tired. The next night, October 16th, I came in prepared to pay closer attention. I'd gotten about 5 hours of sleep during the day, so I felt more alert than usual. The evening was quieter than normal. Only 2 customers before midnight, both just getting gas and leaving immediately. I spent the first few hours organizing the stockroom and updating the inventory spreadsheets on the ancient computer system. Around 2:30, I made fresh coffee and settled in behind the counter, with a good view of both the parking lot and the security monitors. At 3:32, I positioned myself directly in front of the monitors, watching the timestamp count down. 3:32, 3:32:45. At exactly 3:33, the screens went black again. This time, I was ready for it. I immediately looked out the window at the real parking lot. Nothing there, just empty asphalt under the harsh glow of the overhead lights. But when the monitors came back online 10 seconds later, the figure was there again. Same spot, same motionless posture. It appeared to be wearing a long dark coat that hung down almost to the ground. Its face was obscured by shadow, but I could tell it was facing the store, facing me. I stared at the monitor for a full 30 seconds, but the figure didn't move at all, not even a slight shift in posture. It was like looking at a photograph. Then I glanced out the window again, still nothing in the actual parking lot. When I looked back at the monitor, the figure was gone. This time, I checked the system more thoroughly. I pulled up the recording interface on the security computer, an ancient Windows 95 machine that took forever to load anything. The camera recordings were stored on a series of VHS tapes that cycled every 24 hours. I rewound the tape for camera 4 to 3:33 a.m. The recording showed an empty parking lot. No figure, no glitch, nothing unusual at all. But I knew what I'd seen on the live feed. The figure had been there, clear as day, standing motionless by the gas pump. Why wasn't it showing up on the recording? I spent the rest of my shift trying to rationalize what had happened. Maybe there was a problem with the live feed display, but not the recording system. Maybe the cameras were picking up some kind of interference from the radio towers about 20 miles north. Maybe I was developing some kind of vision problem that only affected how I perceived the monitors. None of these explanations felt right, but they were better than admitting I might be losing my mind. On the third night, October 17th, I decided to document everything more carefully. I brought a notebook and pen, and I positioned my phone on the counter with the camera app ready. If something weird happened again, I wanted proof. The night started normally. A few customers during the early hours, including Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who came in every Wednesday around midnight to buy cat food and lottery tickets. She always chatted for a few minutes about her grandchildren and the weather, and her presence made the store feel less isolated. "You look tired, Marcus," she said, as I rang up her purchases. "These overnight shifts can't be good for a young man like you." "I'm managing okay," I replied, though I realized I probably did look rough. The previous night's incident had left me feeling unsettled, and I'd only gotten 3 hours of sleep. "Just make sure you're taking care of yourself," she said, gathering her bags. "And if you ever feel unsafe here alone, don't hesitate to call the police. This is a safe area, but you never know." After she left, I thought about her words. Did I feel unsafe? Not exactly. Confused, maybe. Concerned about my mental state, definitely, but not physically threatened. At 3:30, I prepared for whatever was going to happen. I positioned myself behind the counter with my notebook open, pen ready, and phone camera pointing at the security monitors. I also made sure I had a clear view of the actual parking lot through the window. I started recording on my phone, 3:32:45. But this time, I noticed something else. The fluorescent lights over the gas pumps flickered slightly, just for a second, like there was a brief power fluctuation. When the monitors came back online, the figure was there again, but this time it was closer. Instead of standing at pump 4, it was positioned near the air pump station, about 15 feet closer to the store. It was still wearing that long dark coat, still facing in my direction, still completely motionless. I grabbed my phone to check the recording, but when I played it back, all I could see was my hands holding the phone and the reflection of the fluorescent lights on the monitor screens. The actual images on the monitors weren't visible in the recording, and there was no audio except for my own breathing. "Damn," I muttered, stopping the recording. I looked back at the monitor, But the figure was gone again. I wrote down everything I could remember in my notebook, the exact time, the location of the figure, the power fluctuation in the parking lot lights, the fact that my phone recording hadn't captured what I was seeing on the monitors. As I wrote, a terrible thought occurred to me. What if this wasn't a camera glitch at all? What if there really was someone out there, and they had somehow figured out how to avoid being recorded while still appearing on the live feed? But that didn't make sense either. How could someone be visible to the cameras but not show up on the recordings? And why would they want to just stand motionless in a gas station parking lot for 30 seconds every night? The next night, October 18th, I came in with a different strategy. Instead of just watching the monitors, I would go outside at 3:33 and see if I could spot anything in person. The shift was busier than usual. There was some kind of accident on the interstate, and several tow trucks and emergency vehicles stopped for gas and coffee. I overheard one of the paramedics talking about a multi-car pileup that had backed up traffic for miles. By 2 a.m., things had quieted down, but the unusual activity had left me feeling more alert than normal. At 3:30, I unlocked the front door and stepped outside. The October air was crisp and carried the scent of pine needles from the forest behind the store. The parking lot was illuminated by 4 overhead lights, casting harsh shadows but providing good visibility across the entire area. I positioned myself near the front door, where I could see all 4 gas pumps and most of the parking lot. I checked my phone, 3:32:30. As the seconds ticked by, I scanned the area carefully. The only sounds were the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of traffic on the interstate. No movement, no unusual shadows, nothing that seemed out of place. The lights flickered, just like they had the night before. But this time, I was outside when it happened, and I could see that all 4 overhead lights dimmed simultaneously for about 2 seconds. When they returned to full brightness, I saw it. There was someone standing by pump 2, about 30 feet away from me. My heart stopped. This wasn't a camera glitch or a hallucination. There was actually someone there. The figure was tall, probably over 6 feet, and wearing a long dark coat that hung down to its ankles. It was facing away from me, toward the highway, and standing perfectly still. I couldn't see any details of its face or hands, just the silhouette against the parking lot lights. "Hey," I called out, my voice cracking slightly. "Excuse me." The figure didn't respond. It didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge my voice at all. It just stood there, motionless. I took a step closer. "Sir? Ma'am? Are you okay?" Still no response. I could feel adrenaline coursing through my system, but I wasn't sure if I was scared or just confused. The person's stillness was unnerving, but they weren't doing anything threatening. I took another step closer, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The figure wasn't casting a shadow. The overhead lights were bright enough that everything in the parking lot cast distinct shadows. The gas pumps, the trash cans, even small pieces of litter on the ground. But the figure standing 15 feet away from me wasn't casting any shadow at all. I blinked hard and looked again. The figure was still there, still motionless, still shadowless. "What the hell?" I whispered. At that moment, the figure turned around. I still couldn't see its face clearly. The coat had a hood or collar that obscured the upper part of its head, but I could tell it was looking directly at me, and I could see its eyes. They were reflecting the parking lot lights, like an animal's eyes, except they were the wrong color. Instead of the yellow or green reflection you'd expect, these eyes glowed with a pale, cold blue light. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. Then the figure raised one hand, or what I assumed was a hand, though I couldn't see it clearly under the coat, and pointed directly at me. That broke my paralysis. I turned and ran back into the store, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the deadbolt. When I looked out the window, the parking lot was empty. I checked the security monitors. Nothing there either. I spent the rest of my shift sitting behind the counter, staring out the window and jumping at every small sound. When Janet arrived at 7 a.m., I must have looked terrible because the first thing she said was, "Marcus, are you feeling all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just a rough night," I replied, gathering my things. "I think I might be coming down with something." "Well, make sure you get some rest, and if you're really sick, don't hesitate to call in. We can cover your shift." I nodded and left, but I knew I wouldn't be calling in sick. Whatever was happening here, I needed to understand it. Running away wouldn't solve anything. That day, I couldn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pale blue eyes staring at me. I kept thinking about the figure's unnatural stillness, the lack of a shadow, the way it had pointed at me. None of it made any logical sense. I spent the afternoon researching online, looking for similar experiences or explanations. I found plenty of ghost stories and urban legends, but nothing that matched what I was experiencing. Most supernatural encounters involved movement, sounds, or dramatic manifestations. This thing, whatever it was, just stood there and watched. The next night, October 19th, I came in determined to get answers. I brought a small digital camera, in addition to my phone, hoping that maybe different recording equipment would capture what my phone had missed. I also did something I hadn't done before. I looked up the history of the gas station. I called the county records office during my lunch break and spoke to a clerk who helped me research the property. The current building had been constructed in 1987, but there had been a previous structure on the same site, a small family-owned gas station that operated from 1962 to 1985. That original building had burned down under mysterious circumstances. No one was injured, but the fire department's report noted that the blaze had started sometime around 3:30 a.m. and that the cause was never determined. The property had sat empty for 2 years before the current building was constructed. I asked if there had been any accidents or deaths at the location, but the clerk couldn't find any records of such incidents. Still, the timing was troubling. The original fire had started around 3:30 a.m., and my encounters were happening at 3:33. That couldn't be a coincidence. When I arrived for my shift that night, I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. In the employee break room, there was an old photograph hanging on the wall showing the previous gas station. It was a much smaller building, with just one pump and a tiny convenience store. In the photo, a man in work clothes was standing in front of the building, smiling at the camera. I took the photo down and looked at it more closely. The man appeared to be in his 40s, with dark hair and a friendly face. He was wearing coveralls and holding what looked like a wrench or some other tool. Written on the back of the photo in faded ink was, "Bill Henderson, 1983. I wondered if he had been the owner of the original station, and if he'd been there the night it burned down. At 3:30 a.m., I positioned myself behind the counter with both my phone and the digital camera ready. I also had a notebook where I planned to sketch anything I saw, in case the recordings continued to fail. I started both cameras recording. The lights flickered, both inside the store and in the parking lot. When they stabilized, the figure was there again. This time, it was standing directly in front of the store, just outside the window, maybe 8 feet away from me. I could see it clearly now. The long coat was actually more like a work jacket or coveralls, dark with age and wear. The figure was definitely male, tall and broad-shouldered, and I could see his face. It was Bill Henderson, the same man from the photograph, but changed somehow. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were that same cold blue color that reflected the lights. He was staring directly at me through the window, and his mouth was moving like he was trying to say something. I couldn't hear any sound, but I could read his lips well enough to understand what he was saying. "Help me." I grabbed my notebook and quickly sketched what I was seeing, the coveralls, the pale face, the position relative to the window. As I drew, I kept glancing up at him. He remained motionless except for his mouth, which continued to form the same 2 words over and over, "Help me." After about 30 seconds, he simply faded away. Not disappeared suddenly like before, but gradually became transparent until he was gone. I immediately checked both cameras. The phone had recorded nothing but my reflection in the window, but the digital camera was different. When I played back the footage, I could see a faint translucent outline of a human figure standing outside the window. It was barely visible, like a double exposure on an old film camera, but it was definitely there. This was the first tangible proof I had that something was actually happening. I spent the rest of my shift studying the photograph of Bill Henderson and thinking about what I'd witnessed. If this was really his ghost or spirit, and if he was asking for help, then maybe the original fire wasn't an accident. Maybe something had happened to him that night, something that left him trapped here. The next day, I drove to the Cedar Falls Public Library and spent several hours in the newspaper archives looking for any articles about the fire at the original gas station. I found 3 articles in the Cedar Falls Gazette from October 1985. The first was a brief report about the fire itself, local gas station destroyed in early morning blaze. The article was short and factual. The fire had started around 3:30 a.m. on October 20th, 1985, exactly 37 years before my first encounter. The building was a total loss, but no injuries were reported. The second article, published a week later, was more detailed. Investigation continues into gas station fire. This piece mentioned that the fire department and state investigators were looking into the cause of the blaze, which had started in the office area of the building. There were no obvious signs of arson, but the intensity and rapid spread of the fire were unusual. The third article, from November 1985, was the most interesting. Missing man's car found near burned gas station. According to the report, a car belonging to William Bill Henderson, 43, had been found abandoned in the woods behind the gas station property about 3 weeks after the fire. Henderson had been reported missing by his family on October 21st, the day after the fire, when he failed to return home from work. The article noted that Henderson had been the night manager at the gas station and was supposed to have been working the night the fire occurred. However, his body was never found at the scene, and investigators initially assumed he had escaped the blaze. The discovery of his abandoned car raised new questions about what had happened that night. The final paragraph of the article mentioned that the investigation was ongoing, but that police had no solid leads. Bill Henderson was never found, and the case remained unsolved. I sat back in the library chair, pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. Bill Henderson had been working the night shift on October 20th, 1985, when the gas station burned down. His car was found in the woods, but his body was never recovered. And now, 37 years later, his spirit was appearing to me at exactly 3:33 a.m., asking for help. But help with what? And why me? That night, October 20th, exactly 37 years after the original fire, I came to work with a new sense of purpose. I brought copies of the newspaper articles and the photograph of Bill Henderson. I also brought a voice recorder, hoping that maybe I could capture some kind of audio, even if the visual recordings were inconsistent. At 3:30, I positioned myself at the front counter and turned on the voice recorder. October 20th, 3:30 a.m., I said, "This is Marcus Thompson at the Sunrise Express gas station. Today marks 37 years since the original fire. I'm attempting to communicate with Bill Henderson." The lights flickered as usual. Bill appeared right in front of the window again, but this time he looked more solid, more real. I could see details I'd missed before, the name patch on his coveralls, the lines around his eyes, the desperate expression on his face. "Bill," I said aloud, "I know who you are. I found the newspaper articles about the fire. What happened that night?" His mouth continued to move, forming the same words. "Help me. I want to help you, but I need to know what happened. How did you die?" For the first time, his expression changed. He raised his hands and pressed them against the window glass. I could see his lips forming different words now. "Not accident. The fire wasn't an accident. Someone killed you." He nodded, and then he raised one hand and pointed toward the back of the store, toward the woods where his car had been found. "You want me to go back there, to where they found your car?" He nodded again, more urgently this time. Then he raised both hands and pressed them against the glass again. I could see him mouthing a single word, "Tonight." Before I could respond, he faded away again. I checked the voice recorder. Most of the recording was just my own voice, but at the very end, there was something else, a faint whisper that sounded like, "Help me," followed by what might have been "tonight." The rest of my shift passed in a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about what Bill was asking me to do. He wanted me to go into the woods behind the store, presumably to the area where his car had been found 37 years ago. But why? What did he think I would find there? And more importantly, was it safe? If Bill had been murdered, and if his killer had never been caught, was I walking into some kind of trap? As dawn approached, I made my decision. I would go into the woods after my shift ended, while it was still early morning and I could see clearly. Whatever Bill needed me to find, it had waited 37 years. It could wait a few more hours until I could investigate safely. At 7 a.m., I told Janet I was feeling much better and would see her the next night. Then I went home, grabbed a flashlight, and drove back to the gas station. The woods behind the Sunrise Express were dense with pine trees and undergrowth. There was no clear path, but I could see tire tracks from police and emergency vehicles that had probably been there during the original investigation. I followed these tracks deeper into the forest. After about 10 minutes of hiking, I came to a small clearing where the tracks ended. This was probably where Bill's car had been found. The area was overgrown now, but I could still see signs of the old investigation, some survey stakes, and pieces of yellow crime scene tape that had weathered but not completely disintegrated. I walked around the clearing, looking for anything unusual. At first, I didn't see anything except normal forest debris, fallen logs, pine cones, old leaves. But then, Near the base of a large pine tree, I noticed something that didn't belong. Partially buried under decades of fallen leaves was a metal object. I brushed away the debris and found a small lockbox, the kind people use to store important documents or small valuables. It was rusted and corroded, but still intact. The box was locked, but the metal was so corroded that I was able to pry it open with a sturdy stick. Inside, wrapped in what had once been a plastic bag, was a cassette tape and a folded piece of paper. The paper was badly deteriorated, but I could still make out most of the handwriting. If something happens to me, this tape contains evidence about what's been going on at the station. I've been documenting everything for weeks. They think I don't know, but I've seen the cars coming and going at night. I know about the money. I know about the drugs. If you find this, please take it to the police. Bill Henderson, October 20th, 1985. My hands were shaking as I held the note. Bill hadn't been killed because of some random crime or accident. He'd discovered something illegal happening at the gas station, and he'd been murdered to keep him quiet. The cassette tape was in better condition, protected by the plastic bag. I didn't have a way to play it in the woods, but I knew I needed to get it to the police as soon as possible. As I stood up to leave, I heard a voice behind me. "Thank you." I turned around, and Bill Henderson was standing at the edge of the clearing. But this time, he looked different. The gray pallor was gone, and his eyes were normal. He looked like a living person, except that I could see through him to the trees behind. "You found it," he said, and I could actually hear his voice now, not just read his lips. "Bill, what happened that night? Who killed you?" The station manager, Dave Morrison, was using the place as a distribution point for drugs coming up from the south. Trucks would stop in the middle of the night, transfer packages, and keep going. I started noticing the pattern and began recording everything: license plates, times, descriptions of the people involved. He gestured toward the cassette tape in my hand. "That tape has dates, times, and vehicle information for 3 weeks' worth of drug transfers. Dave found out I was investigating and confronted me that night. We fought, and he hit me with a tire iron. I was dying, but I managed to get to my car and drive back here to hide the evidence before he could find it." What happened to Dave Morrison? He left town right after the fire, probably changed his name, and started over somewhere else. The police never connected him to my disappearance because officially, I died in the fire. My body was never found because I was buried back here in the woods. Bill pointed to a spot about 20 feet away, near another large pine tree. Dave came back the next morning and buried me there. He thought he'd destroyed all the evidence when he burned down the station. I looked at the area he was indicating. After 37 years, there was no visible sign of a grave, but I knew the police would be able to locate remains if they knew where to look. "Why now?" I asked. "Why are you appearing to me after all these years?" "Because you're the first person to work those same overnight hours who was willing to pay attention. Others have seen me, but they dismissed it as imagination or transferred to different shifts. You kept coming back. You were willing to listen. Will you be able to rest now if I take this evidence to the police?" Bill smiled, and for the first time since I'd been seeing him, he looked peaceful. "I think so. I've been waiting so long for someone to find the truth. Thank you, Marcus." He began to fade away, but before he disappeared completely, he said one more thing: "Be careful. Dave Morrison may be old now, but if he's still alive, he won't want this evidence surfacing." And then he was gone. I hiked back to my car with the cassette tape and Bill's note, my mind racing. I drove straight to the Cedar Falls Police Department and asked to speak to a detective. After explaining the situation and showing them the evidence I'd found, they opened a formal investigation. The cassette tape was exactly what Bill had promised: detailed recordings of drug transactions, including dates, times, license plate numbers, and descriptions of the people involved. The police were able to use this information to research what had happened to Dave Morrison. It turned out that Morrison had indeed left Cedar Falls immediately after the fire. He'd moved to Arizona and worked at various gas stations and truck stops over the years. But here's the interesting part. He'd been arrested several times for drug-related offenses and was currently serving time in a federal prison for trafficking charges. The police contacted the FBI, who were very interested in the evidence from 1985. Apparently, the drug operation Bill had uncovered was part of a much larger network that the federal authorities had been investigating for years. Bill's recordings provided crucial historical evidence about how the network had operated in the 1980s. As for Bill himself, police investigators returned to the clearing in the woods with ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. They found his remains buried exactly where his spirit had indicated. After 37 years, Bill Henderson was finally laid to rest properly. The whole investigation took about 3 months to complete. During that time, I continued working at the gas station, but I never saw Bill again. The encounters stopped completely after that morning in the woods when I found his evidence. Dave Morrison was eventually charged with Bill's murder based on the evidence from the cassette tape and testimony from other people who had been involved in the drug operation. He was already serving a long federal sentence, so the additional murder charge didn't change his situation much, but at least there was finally justice for Bill Henderson. I learned something important from this experience. Sometimes the things that seem supernatural or impossible have very human explanations. Bill Henderson wasn't haunting the gas station because he was evil or because he wanted to hurt anyone. He was trapped there because he had unfinished business, a crime that needed to be solved, justice that needed to be served. But I also learned that just because something has a logical explanation doesn't mean it's not real. I saw Bill Henderson's spirit as clearly as I'm seeing these words on the page. I heard his voice, I witnessed his desperation, and I felt the weight of his 37-year wait for justice. Whatever the mechanism that allowed him to appear to me, it was real enough to change both our lives. The Sunrise Express gas station is still operating, and I still work the night shift there, but it's different now. The oppressive feeling that used to settle over the place during those dead hours between 2 and 5 a.m. is gone. The building feels like just a building again, not a prison holding a tormented soul. Sometimes during quiet nights, I think about Bill Henderson and what he went through. He was just a man trying to do the right thing, trying to expose criminal activity that was happening on his watch. He died for that decision, but in the end, his courage and persistence paid off. Justice was served, even if it took 37 years. I've been thinking about changing jobs lately, not because of any supernatural experiences, those are over, but because this whole situation has made me realize that I want to do something more meaningful with my life, maybe law enforcement, or investigative journalism, or something else that involves seeking truth and helping people. Bill Henderson spent his last weeks alive, documenting evidence of criminal activity, and his spirit spent 37 years trying to bring that evidence to light. If a dead man can show that kind of dedication to justice, what excuse do the living have for not trying to make the world a better place? I still have the original cassette tape. The police made copies for evidence but returned the original to me. Sometimes I play it late at night, listening to Bill's voice as he carefully documents what he was seeing at the gas station. His recordings are methodical, detailed, and brave. He knew he was taking a risk by investigating the drug operation, but he did it anyway because it was the right thing to do. That's the real lesson from this experience. Not that ghosts are real, or that the dead can communicate with the living, but that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary courage when they're faced with injustice. Bill Henderson was just a night shift gas station manager, but he chose to stand up against criminals who were using his workplace for illegal activities. He died for that choice, but he never gave up, and neither should we. Last week I applied to the police academy. I start classes in January. I figure if I'm going to spend my nights awake anyway, I might as well use that time to help people and seek justice for those who can't speak for themselves. Bill Henderson would approve, I think. The gas station still gets quiet during those overnight hours, but now the quiet feels peaceful instead of oppressive. The security cameras work normally, the fluorescent lights don't flicker at 3:33 a.m., and the only visitors I get are living customers who need gas and coffee for their late-night journeys. But sometimes, when I'm restocking shelves or cleaning the coffee station during those quiet hours, I think I catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. Not threatening or scary, just a sense of presence, like someone nodding approval. Bill Henderson found his peace, and he helped me find my purpose. That's a fair trade, I think.